Hello and welcome to the Sidekick Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm speaking to Lisa Oglesbee. Lisa is a former paralegal turned life coach for women with anxiety and perfectionism, and podcast host of Love This Bitch and Vibrant Life Allies. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today. I hope that we can get some value for your listeners.
I cannot wait to speak. And for those of you listening on YouTube and watching on YouTube, you can see Lisa is in her very own podcast den. But that behind that, I believe, is sunny Florida.
Right. It's kind of dark. Kind of dark in the podcast corner, but yes, I'm in Florida. It is sunny today, a bit chilly, but it's nice.
Well, those of us who are in London, the UK, are very jealous. Lisa, today our goal is to have an open and honest conversation about your mental health journey, to get some insight into the tools and techniques that have helped you and are available and accessible to other people. And then by discussing your journey, we hope to share and normalize conversations about mental health, as often people are not alone in these experiences. Does that sound good to you?
Yes, that sounds fantastic. I love to do that, to help people see that they're not alone.
Awesome. So Lisa, would take it over to you. We'd love to hear about your mental health journey.
Oh gosh, that could
the entire journey.
Yes, like where to start? Well, when I was born, it was difficult. No,
it's a very traumatic experience, birth.
I think so. Mostly for my mom, but me too, right?
Yeah, I watched my daughter. Wow.
Oh gosh, wow. I'm sure that was traumatic for everyone. Yeah, so I guess the first thing that I noticed or struggled with, and then the first thing that I was diagnosed with was OCD. It's a lot of people call it germophobia, but for me, after I've studied it and learned more about it, it's more about certain types of contamination, which is, what germophobia is centered around is contamination or sickness. So I struggled with that, and I've been diagnosed with that. And then afterwards it was anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder. And then just a few years ago, inattention of ADD. So it's
a lot going
a whole
on.
Host of things.
That actually so tough. And how long, what period did you realize this?
I didn't really, they didn't really start to manifest or cause what I noticed as issues in my life until the end of college. At the beginning of college, I was very sick, physically sick for, I don't even know. It went on for a few months and they couldn't find out what was wrong with me, and I couldn't eat, and I was losing weight, and I was a very thin person to start with. So I got down to 97 pounds, and I'm 5'7", which, sorry, I know your listeners, I don't know the conversions on.
No, don't worry.
On my
5'7" in UK is perfect. I'm also, actually, I claim I'm 5'7". I'm technically 5'6".
Go with it.
I try to. So yeah, so you were so you were small. You were also very thin at the same time.
Yeah, and so I lost a lot of weight, and I couldn't eat, and so it was an interesting period of time trying to figure out what was wrong with me, and the doctors were just like, the blood work looks good, you're fine. And so I couldn't get any help for quite a long time until I got very, very sick and ended up having surgery for a very simple procedure to have my gallbladder removed. But it had gotten so bad that it was poisoning my body. And, and the doctor was like, this was very bad. I'm glad we caught this when we did, which is not really something you hear in a first world country from a gallbladder surgery. So that was at the beginning of college. So towards the end, when I was trying to graduate with highest honors and I was working 2 jobs, I started a new relationship that apparently was very complicated in my society and my environment. And so those things came together, and I started being very afraid of anything that could make me sick, and started, that's where my anxiety decided to be like, let's try and control you getting ill. And so that started the hand washing, the not wanting to touch things, and those kind of compulsions. So
And was that the first time that it had reared its head, or before that had you had some compulsions around, like you said, around cleanliness, around hand washing, or was that the first time the anxiety took hold?
It was the first time it connected with any kind of like sickness or
Mm,
contamination. I hadn't really had those issues before. But well, I guess when I say contamination, I do remember in high school, I guess this is kind of weird, when we would go in the chemistry lab,
mm,
then I would get, and I didn't realize what it was at this time, but I didn't like to touch anything in there because of the chemicals.
mm.
And I would get like spots on my hands that I thought were tingling. So that was interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know until many years later that that is a part of, OCD, is where you think you can actually feel the
yeah.
contamination on you.
And it's interesting. I think you chose a very subtle use of phrasing there about the anxiety to almost give you control to kind of not get ill again. It's almost as if you phrased it as if that anxiety was almost trying to protect you in a certain way. Did it feel like that at the time?
I don't know, like, if I put it together, like, in my mind at that time, but it is something that I have come to see that, our anxiety reactions, even when they're, over
Yeah.
overkill or a bit more than we need, are just our brain's way of trying to protect us.
Mm,
And it is something very interesting I've noticed in my life now. If an actual circumstance arises that normally would really stress people out, it's not that I don't get stressed about it, I do, but I tend to be actually much more calmer than when my mind was inventing, things like I turned my head too fast. I probably severed the vein in the back of my neck and I'm going to
mm,
die soon.
yeah.
Like, yeah, I would just become obsessed with that for days.
Mm.
Whereas now if something is actually significantly happening, my brain doesn't really focus on that, if that makes sense. It's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah, it is, and it must be. It's so hard because, like you said, if those thoughts were dominant in your mind for several days at a time, like surely it must be so hard to think of anything else and do anything else.
Right. Yeah. And that's actually what I would hope for, is that I finally connect with something else long enough to get distracted from the
Mm.
current obsession, when it's something like that I'm going to die from some rare, horrible thing that's not happening
Yeah,
so far.
but how is it? So during that time, are you aware that? So as it goes on, are you aware that you're almost like, okay, I know these thoughts are on repeat, and I know that I need to break this cycle, but I just can't. Is it an awareness, or are you fully trapped in this belief of, like you said, I'm going to move my head too fast and my spine's going to snap?
Right, it's actually one of the interesting things about OCD, because unlike some other conditions, you realize that there is I through coaching, I don't really like to think of things as being irrational now, but you realize that it's not actually real or helpful,
Mm,
and that's part of the anxiety. Like, you have to wash your hands, for example, you're compelled to wash your hands. And so you start washing your hands and there's like a moment of relief, like, okay, I'm getting the germs off.
mm,
And then it's like over immediately, and it's like, you just wash your hands 3 times in a row.
mm.
Why did you do that? You didn't need to do that. That's
Yeah.
excessive. Now your hands are gonna bleed, and so there is an awareness there that makes it kind of worse, because
Mm,
you realize that you're acting in a way that is not really, you've gone from maybe taking measures to not get sick to
mm.
a level of, disturbing your actual
Yeah.
life and not really getting any benefit from it.
And that must be really hard. I mean, I'm not sure if it's hard for you now, having gone through the process, but in terms of the kind of the pandemic and COVID, like I can imagine that a lot of people who are suffering from OCD are really, most likely really struggling during this period.
Yeah, I actually think about that all the time. Like,
Mhm.
if I had not found coaching
Yeah.
prior to the pandemic, like, I cannot imagine if I would have been able to function, or if I would, have just gone home and not come out.
Mm,
um, and I'm sure some people have done that, and I totally understand why they did that. So it's actually been very interesting for me to go through this experience, knowing where I've been in my life, because I see other people who maybe don't have mental health issues or haven't struggled with something like this. And I've actually been able to be there for some people, like a coworker early on. I remember she was like, I don't have anxiety. Things don't bother me. And yet she's like in tears wanting to work from home for her family's safety. And
Yeah.
she's like, I've never experienced this. And I'm like able to sit there and talk to her and provide comfort with her because I know what that's like.
Yeah.
I had that pre-pandemic and I have been able to work through it and learn tools to help me manage that. So just very, very fortunate that I I went through that and learned those
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, and also now you're in a privileged position to be able to share that experience with people and really guide them and help them through this, because it is a really, really difficult time, especially when people are, like you said, in lockdown. In London at the moment, we're fully locked down. Whole of UK is in lockdown. A lot of people who are frankly trapped at home. It's cold, it's dark, and some of these thoughts are really starting to rear their heads. And having these conversations, I think, is invaluable.
Right. Absolutely. And so it happens like that a lot in life. You do go through struggles, but it's great to be able to, once you've come through that, to use that to help other people who are going through that.
Yeah.
So it has been very interesting for me. And if someone, like the situation with my coworker and people, when this comes up, I'm always happy to talk about it and help them through those thoughts as best that I can, since I know I know what it's like.
Yeah. And you can empathize. So just going back, like you said, to that kind of that period during college, up till now, what's that journey been like to go from suffering from OCD to what I assume now is much better. You're able to function on what you would describe a kind of a regular basis, day to day.
Yeah, it was really interesting because for years after college, I just managed it. Like a lot of people, I didn't think that, I should take medication. I thought, I should be strong and, willpower through it. And I did that for many years, even after I had gotten the anxiety diagnosis and the major depression. I was like, oh, I'm not that sad. It's okay. I can manage this. And then I went through a period of chronic pain
Mm.
um, from, working at a desk 8 to 10 hours a day. And I had like this horrible muscle pain in my back. And it became like, I can't do I can't manage OCD, anxiety, and depression and be in pain every single day. It
It's a
was just
huge amount.
right. It was too much. And so I finally, tried to reach out and get help. And I did medication and therapy and psychologists and doctors and everything they told me. And over the next several years, it actually just got worse, which was interesting. Not that there weren't aspects of all those things that helped, and I still recommend people struggling with mental health issues, of course, see a doctor,
Yeah.
A medical professional to diagnose and treat. Coaches don't do that.
Mm.
But for me, there was just periods of alleviation with those things until I had gotten like rock bottom, was just absolutely miserable despite having a really lovely life. I mean,
Mm.
I had a great job, I had money, I had a secure support system around me.
Mm.
Everything in my life was good, but I was just severely depressed.
Mm.
And um, that became so bad that I didn't even worry about OCD anymore. I was like, oh, who cares if my hands are bleeding?
Right. Yeah.
I'm miserable and I hate everything. Um, so that was very interesting. And so it finally brought me to the place where I was like, I'll do anything, I'll try anything.
Mm.
And I found a life coach. And that's when I, started working with her and
Mm.
came to learn the tools that I have now. And it just changed everything, which is, why I was like, I'm going to get certified in this. I'm going to get,
Mm.
training from an institution so that I can help other women with this, because
Mm.
I couldn't find anything that worked for me. So I know that there are other people out there, searching for something that will
Yeah.
work for them.
And it's interesting you said that, so you went through that kind of what you would class as the more traditional mental health kind of diagnosis, so going to a medical professional, going through being on medication but that not working, going through talking therapy, that not working. And I think what's a really important point to bring out is that whilst those things do work for some people, they don't work for everyone. And what I think what's really inspiring about your approach, your story, is that you tried those things. And yes, at the time, I assume it must have felt horrendous, but you got to the end of it and you realized that none of these things are working. I need something different. Because there's been several conversations we've had on this podcast where people have just persevered. They've been on the wrong medication. They've persevered for years, and nothing is happening. And it seems to me that if you are going through an approach where you know that you're feeling very low, very bad, and you want to get to a point of positivity and happiness, then trying lots of different things in quick succession, giving them enough time to be able to take effect. But if they're not working, don't persevere, just move on to the next thing. And it seems like you found what worked for you in life coaching.
Right. And it's important to, educate people and help them see that it is a process and you
Yeah.
do have to try different things. I remember, like, specifically with the medication, it having been such a struggle for me to get to that point where I was willing to try that.
Mm,
And then I took one, it didn't work. I took a different one, it didn't work. And
mm,
I was just like, you finally decide, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this medication, and then it
yeah.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you find out that it's this process, and you
Mm,
might have to take many different medications. Or for me to get some relief, it ended up being like a combination of
mm,
several different things. And so I don't think a lot of people know that is like a process. You don't
yeah.
go in and get a pill and then you're like, I feel better. It
Yeah.
can actually be a long process, and there's side effects. And, if you're already feeling bad and you have no awareness of that and you're not
Mm.
prepared for that, it can actually, make things worse or add another stressor to your life.
Yeah, and fundamentally, like if you knew, or if you know that process is going to be long, I mean, motivation is very difficult, right? Like, to think that you're already feeling low, you're very low, you can barely get out of bed, but the thought that the work required to make yourself feel better feels like a mountain, and that's the only option. It must be so difficult.
Yeah, and that part, that is very difficult as well. And I was fortunate, even though it took a while, but I finally found, a doctor that was like, get back in therapy. You have to do some kind of mental work,
Mm,
along with the medication. You need to do both.
yeah.
And here she is, a doctor who that is her jobs to prescribe medications. And she
Mm,
told me, she was like, that is actually the most important part, is the inner work that you do, whether it's with a therapist, or when I told
yeah.
her that I was also doing coaching, she was like, that's great.
Yeah.
It's that's the work that's going to help you.
And that mental work, like, even in good times, that needs to continue, because there's always a big transition. I mean, we've just hit a year ago with the pandemic, and no one predicted, like, things come out of the blue, and you've got to you have to have that resilience to be able to get through these things. And there are these transitions through life which are very natural. You go through school, university, college, which is a big transition, relationships, marriage, divorce, bereavement. Like, there's all these things that happen through life, and we know that's going to happen to all of us, but they're big transitions. And having the toolkit available to you and working on that every day will enable you to kind of smooth those transitions through, which is really important, right? And
Right.
assuming from a life coach perspective as well, that must be it, to support people in not a life which is devoid of emotion, but where you can manage your emotions.
Right. That is exactly what we do. And that's always part of the process, is once people learn these tools, sometimes they get frustrated because they go through those emotions again. And then that's when you work with them, like, you're a human being, right? If
Mm,
you work through this situation in one aspect, some other, thing can happen in the future that's going to trigger those same emotions, but it's in a different way.
mm,
So you're going to have to process it again. You don't get to this point where everything is always amazing and you never have any human emotions. I
yeah.
mean, that's life. We get to experience all of the human emotions, which
Yeah.
gives them their contrast, right? If you never had anything bad, well, how would you know what good felt like?
Yeah, and it's tricky, especially with the negative emotions. We're almost, I'm not sure, like we're conditioned to kind of think that the negative emotions are exactly that, negative and shouldn't happen. But if you can get to a place where you can embrace anger, sadness, fear, these difficult emotions, like they don't necessarily need to be, they don't necessarily be long lasting. Sorry, long lasting.
I like it.
But to get but to get to a point where you're able to kind of feel that, like, okay, I feel angry, but this is what I'm going to do to make myself feel better, or release that anger so I'm able to get on with my life.
Right, exactly. And that's part of the process for me with my clients is helping them see that so much of what we do in life is to avoid those negative emotions,
Mm,
and so we miss out on so much
yeah,
thing. Like
well
if
said.
you're trying to avoid any pain or any suffering, you might not reach out for career opportunities. You might not pursue relationships
Yeah,
because of, there's going to be pain,
yeah.
in a relationship at some point. And so we avoid those things and we want to, avoid them or numb out with,
Mm,
maybe it's a TV binge or alcohol or anything. We just want to avoid those emotions.
mm,
But you can actually learn, like you said, that emotional resilience where you allow yourself to feel those emotions and process them so that you're not always angry, you're not always sad,
mm,
right? Because when you're just trying to push it to the side and resist it, it's always there because you've
yeah.
not dealt with it and it's always lingering. Whereas if you can work on that strength to go through it, you go through it and
Mm,
then there's something on the other side for a while, right? You're
yeah.
happy again, or you have some other emotion. You're not just feeling or avoiding feeling the negative
I
emotion.
think that's a really good way to put it. Like, by dealing with it, it can move on. You can deal with it, it can move on, and you've created the space for other emotions. And yes, the next emotion might be a negative one, but at least you've dealt with one at a time. It does seem like sometimes that, I mean, it's very hard, I find, to be angry and joyful at the same time. It doesn't really happen. They
Yes.
a lot of the emotions, whilst they do have some kind of mutual pairing, a lot of them aren't mutual at all. So once you are able to deal with that anger, that can go to the back, and hopefully you've got some space for a bit of joy and a bit of excitement.
Right, exactly. And as long as you're avoiding it, like I said, and keeping it, it's still there, but it's just kind of over to the side. You're not paying attention.
Yeah.
That's taking up that space for those other more positive emotions that
Mm.
that we enjoy feeling.
So talk to me about the process where you went through the life coaching yourself. You said you were in it, you had gone through various kind of therapeutics, didn't work for you. Then you found a life coach. Now, that process of finding a life coach, how did it come about? Just talk us through that journey from your perspective, please.
Well, that's why I have a podcast now. It actually started with a podcast.
Okay.
I, was feeling miserable going about my life and, didn't even know to be searching for some other answer because I was trying so many things.
Mm,
And I, was working on a project one weekend and I was looking for something to listen to and I found a podcast by a coach. And so I started listening to that and, it helped just listening to that and hearing the tools and the information. And then, I started getting like, well, I'm still struggling very
mm,
badly, but I know that this makes sense. It makes sense to me and I think it would help, but I'm just not sure how to connect that, how to
mm,
apply it. So I had reached out to that coach and talked to her and even did like a few little like free coaching sessions that she had, but, she decided at that time that we weren't a good fit. So I kept following her though and talking to her. And then during one of those free sessions, she mentioned another coach
okay.
and, things had gotten worse at that point.
Mm,
And I talked to that coach and, I was just so ready. So I was like willing to make the investment. And it was quite an investment at the time. And I made it and, started working with her and meeting, once a week and she was helping me with my thoughts and seeing the blocks there, seeing the things that were contributing to my struggles and my suffering, and, how to start shifting those thoughts and actually apply it to my life, which is, the connection I was missing just from listening to it. And so, we worked together. I worked with her for a year, and, that was after about 6 months, my life was just so, I mean, I knew that there was still work to do and that it would be consistent, but it was just so different that's when I also started, training to do it myself, because I was like, this is amazing. Like, I couldn't believe that I was where I was after such a long journey to find some help, and, not finding it.
And how do you, and you've been through talking therapies, like you said. Can you just tell us the difference between, let's say, talking therapy and life coaching? Because I've also had both, but I think the benefit of the listeners, like, that there are subtle differences, and it'd be interesting to kind of to understand a little bit more about that kind of life coaching process, so that people who maybe haven't thought about it or haven't tried it maybe would consider that.
Sure. For me, and I'm sure there are many different therapists who have different approaches, but for the ones that I went to versus coaching, the difference was, in therapy, you do talk and kind of work through things, and you kind of create like some awareness of what's going on with you. Like, if you have a negative mindset, or, where it might have come from in your past, and why you think that way. But for me, none of the ones I worked with, there was no application to real life. Like, okay, so where do I go from here now that I have this information? Like, and, that does open up some doors and change things, just knowing, what's going on. But like, actually using it and making it part of my life and making the change, was just not connecting for me. So that was the difference for me with coaching, is that you learn, how to actually take that moment of awareness and practice it throughout the day. So you actually know when those things are happening. And then you can start looking at, what are my thoughts that are causing this? Why do I think this way? Do I want to change these thoughts? And then also having that action plan for how to change them.
That's interesting. So it's the practical application of those kind of approaches, those tools, those strategies on your life, which would make, I can see how that would, it comes back to the word coaching in some respects.
Right.
So you see, like, you're being guided and mentored by someone who has not necessarily more knowledge than you, but a bit of an objective approach on you as a person, and then is enable you to help you explore and guide you, and effectively, I assume, set you homework as well. I remember through when I did life coaching, I got a lot of homework, and I was not expected to do that homework. And I think that's something, especially when you're paying for it, you're kind of like, why have I got to do the homework? I'm paying for this. But then you kind of realize you're actually, I'm paying for that person's time to guide me, to help me unlock this work that I need to do. And I think there needs to be a mindset shift as well, because I think, like you said, it is a considerable investment, especially, depending on what stage of your life it's at. But it's not like a course where you pay for and you get everything. You're getting moments of a very experienced person's time, who specializes in working with people, working through these transitions. But a lot of the work is for you. So really, to make that distinction that you've got a lot of homework to do, and if you don't do it, well, frankly, it's like physiotherapy. If you're hurting and you don't do your physio, then what's the point? You're still going to hurt. It's quite simple, isn't it? Like, I found that if I didn't do it, then I'm not going to improve, and that was the result.
Exactly. You do have to do the work. And, that's actually one of the good things about investing in yourself is, it is quite scary, but it's the only type of investment that you can control the return on the investment.
100%.
So
I think that word investment actually is the key word. It's not expenditure. You're not just spending, you are investing in yourself. And I really think that if everyone could allocate X% of their salary towards investing in themselves, I think the world will be hopefully a bit more of an empowered place.
Absolutely. And that is a hard place for people to get to, is that level of understanding that it's an investment and not an expenditure, because it's like, oh, I'm going to pay this amount of money, and what am I tangibly getting?
Mm.
And you can't really see it. But if you invest in yourself, there are tangible benefits. And one of them is generally, having that extra space and happiness in your life, and that resilience generally leads to more income
Yeah.
for you in some way. So
Exactly.
it usually literally makes the investment back.
And to be honest, I think that's a really worthwhile. And actually, I've never really thought about it in that way. That's exactly right. If you are a happier, more positive, more centered, more capable and confident person, you're going to find work that better suits you, and frankly, be better at it. And therefore, if there's opportunities to earn decent money from it, that's what you're going to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of living in the fear and the negative all the time, you're able to see the opportunities around you and take advantage of them. Where, in the past, if you were struggling with anxiety or, fear of failure, fear of rejection, those type of things that were undermining your confidence, then you weren't going to see those opportunities. Or if you did, you were, much less likely to take advantage of them.
And was there a moment during that coaching process where you felt almost like the light switch on, that you could really feel that, either your confidence had returned or the anxiety had diminished, the OCD had diminished? Was there something that really started to kind of take hold, or was it a very incremental change that when you step back, you're like, wow, I've made a lot of progress?
I think for the most part, it was very incremental, that it wasn't like just one light bulb moment, but there were times when it would hit me. I remember one time I like started tearing up because I was like, I'm happy. And I was like, how long has it been since I have just felt happy?
Mm.
And I also, at that actually happened, that moment hit me during the pandemic, because I was like,
Right.
I've struggled with OCD, and it's been so painful for me, and just, crippling anxiety at times. And here I am during a pandemic, happy.
Yeah.
And I was just like blown away. Like that
Yeah.
was
Well,
a
that's a sign of progress for you.
right. But, and then with the incremental, like, I also remember so many times where we would be working on something, and I would just be like, oh, I'll be so glad when I don't have to think about this anymore or struggle with this anymore. And then, we would be a few months later talking about something else, and it would come to me. I'd be like, I don't remember the last time I thought about X, about when I was struggling with that. And I didn't even notice that it had happened. I had just kind of moved on to the next thing that
That's
I
awesome.
wanted to work on, which, is another thing to work on, being able to celebrate the wins and see the wins that we have.
Yeah. And do you and where you are now, do you still find that anxiety and OCD does rear their heads sometimes, or do you feel like they're still there? Do they disappear? Are you keeping them at bay? What does it feel like in the context of that?
It feels more, like we talked about before, like a human life,
Mm.
right? Anxiety is something that's going to happen,
Yeah. Good
especially
point.
if there is, if you're someone who maybe has thought patterns that have started in childhood that you've always had that lead to that, or maybe you do have a chemical imbalance in your brain that contributes to that. Like OCD, it also has a hereditary component.
Mhm.
So I can maybe, have it in remission or not struggle with it, but I
It's still
have,
part of you.
yes, I have that. But there is a difference in being depressed and anxious and stressed out every day, all the time,
Mm.
and having normal human experiences where it's like, oh, I'm having a bad day, or, maybe a circumstance has come along that's different and new for me. And so it's triggered some old feelings, and I have to work through them.
Mm.
But I know now that I have those tools and that I can work through it. So I know it's not going to be months and months, of what I've gone through before, but it's a process that I am going to work through, and I know how to do that, and I just have to do the work.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's not like you're going back to square one. You can open up that toolkit and say, right, okay, right, I have you know, I've taken a couple of steps back, but I know if I do X, Y, and Z, that's going to really help me. And I'd be interested to know from your perspective, like, what are the tools and tips that have really helped you, first personally, and then also what would be the tools and tips that you would say to anyone that could really kind of benefit their confidence, their capability, make them feel genuinely more positive.
Right. So
Big
obviously
question,
no, we talked about it. I knew this was coming, but you know, there's so many different tools that you can use, and it's kind of like a process finding which ones work the best for you. I think that, you know, I'm not saying that everybody should hire a coach. That might not be where they are, but you know, if you are able to make that investment and work with a coach, you know, the things you learn there, like thought work, being able to realize, and you can do this part on your own, or you can listen to a podcast like mine or yours, and you know, get these tips from people. When you're able to see that, you know, thoughts, that's not who you are. And just because you have a thought, it doesn't make it true. It's just things firing off in your head. Your brain's trying to make sense of things. So, you know, being able to realize that you don't have to believe everything that pops into your head, and that you can choose which thoughts to, you know, engage with and to believe. And that's very important to start looking at that, because you'll see how many of us have negative narratives and stories in our heads that make, you know, our suffering more than it has to be, right? Like it's a pandemic that does suck, but your mind can make it be like, this is the end of the world. How I'm never going to survive this. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my friends, my family. Things will never be normal. Like when you start really getting into that story, that's what makes it, you know, that much more painful. So, you know, one of my tips would be to start, you know, having awareness of what's going on in your mind, and being, you know, willing to question your own thoughts. Like, are these thoughts true? Are these thoughts serving me, or are they, you know, contributing to suffering or pain? And, you know, be able to have that kind of understanding and awareness of your own mind, and, you know, practice just mindfulness and in meditation as well. That helps with, you know, realizing when the mind's running away in these stories, that you can step back into the present moment and connect with what's really going on. And, you know, things like connecting with your breath or your body, how these emotions are feeling physically in your body, instead of living in these stories in your mind. So that mindfulness meditation is also very helpful. I can keep going.
Yeah, no, but yeah, no, please do. I was literally just making a note, just so I remembered what you were saying about the mind, you know, or the thoughts not necessarily being true. Like, I remember when I first I think I was probably told this or realized it, and I was blown away. I was like, what? Like, my thoughts aren't true? Like, everything I'm thinking is true and it's valid, but I mean, turns out it's not. I think that's quite a big awareness. I certainly, you know, taking that logic, you know, one step further, it was kind of like, well, hold on, can I trust anything I think? And I think as you do go inside and start to have some awareness about your mind and how you're thinking, you do learn to be able to you know, to kind of identify what you can trust and what might be a little bit of fake news. Pardon the current pun. But
right. No, that's true.
Right?
Your brain absolutely will give you fake news in an effort to try and keep you safe.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing. It's doing it to keep you safe, but it's not true. And I mean, for me, that was mind-blowing and also really, really confusing. And I think being able to separate, or sometimes even label it, like sometimes a thought comes into your head and it's ridiculous. You know what I mean? And, you know, it pops in your head, and, you know, I now look at it and I will say out loud, go away, go away,
Nice.
go away. Not interested in whatever you've got to say. Like, go away. It's not relevant at the moment. And I do think that sometimes if you can have that narrative, because like you said, there's a lot of stories and kind of negative self-talk and narrative that we have in our mind, but, you know, you forget you can talk back. And actually,
right.
you are the speaker of your own mind. So if you've got a voice which is chirping up and saying negative things, just tell it to shut up. That's my view. I mean, it might be a very loud voice, but if you can talk back to it and maybe understand it and even reason with it, you might get a bit of an insight into what you're feeling.
Right. And, for a lot of people, when you do get to this thought that comes up a lot and you've worked through it, that is the perfect time to be like, no, we've already done that. Go away.
Yeah, naughty, go away.
Yes. But I think, for some people, it's a process of having to learn how to actually be aware of the thoughts instead of them just popping in your head. They're true. We're running that track. We're going with it. And, taking that time to be like, why am I connecting with this thought? Why am I believing this thought? And really showing yourself that awareness, but also like self-compassion for realizing that, it's just a thought that came up in your brain. It doesn't mean anything about you as a person. You don't have to keep it. And, you can look at it as, does this thought help me? And that's when, if you believe it, and you can't just tell it to go away, that's when, it helps to have a coach or to know the process for identifying why you think that thought, and then working through what we do is, instead of just saying, okay, instead I'm going to think this totally opposite thought that I don't believe, is learning how to take like baby steps or baby thoughts that we can believe, that are just a little more positive or even a little more neutral than that negative thought, and slowly over time change it to a thought that serves us.
And I think that's perfectly put. And I think a nice analogy which springs to mind when I talk about kind of the thought reframing. I think the NHS in the UK, the British Public Health Service, talks about catch it, check it, reveal it, or something. But basically, it's that process of thought reframing where you are catching your thought, you're checking it, and you're saying, hold on, I'm going to reframe that in a different way so that I can move on in a much more positive way. And I think
exactly.
And that kind of analogy as well, like you can, if you imagine your thoughts as a river, and you're immersed in the river, or you're watching the river, however you're doing it, you can dam up those thoughts. You can choose to let relevant thoughts through. You can choose to stop the dam and stop thinking, relatively stop thinking for a while. And you can allow those thoughts to say, okay, well, that one I don't want anywhere near it, so I'm going to divert it. It's not even going to come down my river. But I'm going to replace it with something from over here, which actually might be a little bit more productive.
Right, exactly. It's being able to see those thoughts that aren't true or aren't serving you, and, realizing that you have the power to change them because, you're choosing to believe them right now. And you might have reasons for that, but you can work through those as well and see how, they may not be true for you.
So like you said, from a professional life coach, what's the process? So if I came to you as a client, or a new client, can you talk me through the process and what I would, could expect, what the process could be, what the level of work would have to be, and also the commitment as well?
Sure. So, and it varies. Coaches have different levels of programs that they use. For me right now, though, I just stick to, I don't know if you would call it the basics, but what worked for me and what I know I can get results for my clients with. And that's just, whether you pick 3 months or 6 months or a year, it's a weekly meeting to do that, work, whether you have an objective outside person helping you look at the thoughts. And then I also allow my clients to reach out to me via voice messages all throughout the week. So that if something comes up and they're not sure, they're like, how do I apply what I've learned to this? Instead of having to wait for a week, they can reach out to me and get answers right away. But, that's the process, is talking about what's going on, but not like a talk therapy type way, but immediately identifying, okay, well, these are the thoughts, these are the issues that are causing this for you. And these are the steps to take throughout this next week to change that and to start shifting the mindsets that are holding you back or causing you pain.
And And
that's how we work.
Yeah, and do you start to see change in your clients? Can you see change week by week?
Yeah, it can be, depending on the different circumstances that they're having to work through. It can be something that is just like life, mirrors life, right? It's up and down throughout the process, but um, you know, there's there's always these moments of just really huge breakthroughs, and then seeing how that applies to their lives it's just super amazing. But also my favorite part is the more the more gradual, I guess, that we've talked about, is just so many of the calls will start out and they're like, very down, or they just, the way they show up is just like, they're just kind of like, their shine isn't there. And then after, different periods of time for different people, they start showing up on the calls and just sitting there, like, when you're doing rapport, getting started, you can see that they're happy.
Yeah.
And just that always makes me happy, because I'm like, okay, they're doing the work. Things are changing, and they don't even have to tell me yet, specifically what they've been working on, which we always go over that, but I can see it when they first get on the call with me, just that they're not showing up the same way they were, and that's really amazing.
I suppose it's that kind of non-verbal communication that over call might be a bit more difficult to see, but when maybe face to face, where you can start to see that people are a bit more relaxed. They've turned up, so they're actually happy to be there. I know they've paid, but often you can tell when someone actually wants to be there rather than just paying to be there.
Right.
It's it must be, it must be like, for yourself as well, must be very, must be hugely rewarding. Do you find, because I think, what you said, you went through various therapies to get to life coaching, but for some people, life coaching won't work, I assume, and others things will work. Like, what would you say to someone who is maybe in a coaching situation that it isn't working? Is it about finding the right coach? Is it about trying something different, something new?
Yeah, I would say that if it doesn't seem to be working, to really look at, if you're putting the work in, and then also your connection with the coach. I know a lot of people, they do a little bit of coach shopping, and which is fine, but I always have the concern that it's price shopping.
Yeah.
Because that's not, not that you can't get benefit from any coach at any price, but to really do the work, you need to have a connection with that person so that you're listening and applying what they're saying. Because if coaching's not working for you, it's usually from your attachment to those thoughts. And we can be very, very attached to our thoughts. I don't really, they say some people are uncoachable. And sometimes in my mind, I think people are uncoachable, but that's just a thought. And usually it's sparked by someone who's just like, you come at it from many different angles, and they're just like entrenched in a particular thought. So if that's something I would definitely, if you're struggling to get benefit from coaching, is to look at, like, what thought are you having that you don't want to let go, and why is that, if it is causing some kind of issue for you, or you are suffering with anxiety or imposter syndrome or perfectionism, and you're not achieving your goals, or you're not feeling good about achieving them.
Well, Lisa, honestly, thank you so much for a fascinating, insightful conversation. And thank you for being so honest about your struggles. So going back to when you were at college, OCD, illness, anxiety, depression, and then to find coaching, having gone through such a broad range of therapies, and finding what works for you, and then being so enamored with it that you are now you are a life coach yourself, and giving back. And the fact that you are well, like you said, in the context of a pandemic, during a pandemic, is amazing. So honestly, thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope that, something that I've said will resonate with anyone who might be in a similar situation, and help them through it.
And thank you so much to everyone listening. You can subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just search for Sidekick Community or Psychic Stories and we'll pop up. Please do give us a rating if you like the show. And do check out our free Sidekick app for iPhone and iPad, a collection of interactive exercises, tools and tips to help boost your mental well-being. The app enables you to build a personalised well-being toolkit to help you deal with life's ups and downs. Just go to our website, www.sidekick.org.uk, and click the Download Now button in the header to take you to the App Store. Lisa, thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you.